Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Tegan Taylor. I'm a health and science reporter for the ABC and co-host of the CoronaCast. And it is my absolute pleasure to be hosting this event celebrating STEM women on International Women's Day. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous lands on which we're meeting all over the place. I'm coming from Naarm this morning, the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And the people who are the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting also love to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today, especially the history of the women First Nations people. Each year on the 8th of March, we celebrate International Women's Day. It's long been a collaborative effort of people across the globe calling for action to accelerate women's equality. And this year, we're recognising the United Nations theme of cracking the code, innovation for a gender equal future, which is about championing the skills and accomplishment of women in all areas of innovation, particularly in the fields of science, technology, engineering, mathematics and medicine, STEM. And our guest speakers, who I will introduce shortly, are all leaders in their respective fields, advocates for women's equality and innovators. We're going to hear stories from their lives and careers. We'll explore barriers and inequities that they've faced, and we'll talk about how they are inspiring future generations in the field of STEM. I hope that they will inspire you as well. And at the end of the talk, we'll do a question and answer session with all three women. When you registered for this event, you may have submitted a question. I'm going to do my best to put as many of those to our speakers as I can. This recording is going to be made public following the event. If you need to leave early, we hope you don't, but it's okay if you do. You'll have a link to the recording emailed out to you if you registered for the event. So I'm going to introduce our speakers just briefly at this stage because we're going to get to dig into each of their expertise in detail in the coming minutes. But our three speakers are Scientia Professor Veena Sahajwalla. She's the Director of the UNSW Sustainable Materials Research and Technology Centre. Hannah Beda, she's a University of Sydney alumna and learning designer and research lead at Creatable. And Scientia Professor Anushka Patel, Chief Executive Officer of the George Institute for Global Health and a Scientia Professor at the University of New South Wales. Thank all three of you for taking the time out to be with us today. Now, we're just going to dive right in. I want to have a Q&A with each of you so we can really dig into your expertise. We're going to start with you, Veena. Happy International Women's Day.
And to you too, Tegan.
So for people who might not know your background, it's pretty difficult not to know Veena's background if you've been around the UNSW traps for a bit. She is an internationally recognised materials scientist, engineer and inventor, revolutionising recycling science. She's currently the founding director of the UNSW Sustainable Materials Research and Technology, SMART, Centre at UNSW. In 2018, Veena launched the world's first e-waste microfactory, and in 2019, she launched her plastics and green ceramics microfactories, a recycling technology breakthrough. Last year, Veena received the 2022 Australian Museum Eureka Prize, the Celestino Eureka Prize for promoting understanding of science, and the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering's Clooney's Ross Innovation Awards. She was also named the 2022 Australian of the Year. Gosh, you're impressive, Veena.
You're too kind, Tegan.
So tell us, what were the traditional career options for girls when and where you were growing up?
Yeah, so I was born in Mumbai, and the traditional pathway would have been, nice girls go off and become doctors, maybe, get into caring professions, and whether it's nursing, teaching, medicine.
All very important professions.
Very important professions, yes, except I guess my parents were not too impressed when I said, no, actually, I'm not into all the biological stuff. I'm kind of more into all the hard physical stuff. I can't work with things that live. I have to work with things that are I can literally pull apart and break and not
but you're breathing new life into material.
Yes, I am indeed, and so the ability to do science and engineering in that sort of physical world of being able to look at all kinds of things that we need meant that for me, the choice was obvious. I really had to do that sort of world of science and engineering where it was going to be about how do you in fact see the opportunity to make new things, but to make new things in a completely different way. So part of that connectivity between, things do fall apart. And yes, of course, growing up in Mumbai, that was quite a normal thing to take things down to the local shop and get them repaired and fixed. And you didn't kind of just throw it away because, of course, not everyone can afford to buy new things all the time. Every time you had to think about your school shoes, you could take it to the local repair guy, last year's shoes, and get it all fixed up. So it was actually a pretty cool, fun thing to do. I actually felt, kind of making those trips to various sort of repair shops and people who offered all these incredibly clever services. I thought they were pretty clever because it was like, my gosh, they'd fix up all these things, then they were as good as new. So, yeah, no, I mean that was something that always fascinated me as to how clever and creative people were. So for me, part of that sort of growing up and listening to all the stories on the streets as I would talk to the guy who fixes up your shoes had a little corner store, at the end of the street. It was actually a pretty fun thing to do. So I guess I think in the early days for my parents it was pretty obvious. Now she's probably going to go off and do something other than biological sciences, and so here I am.
So do you think that like grassroots manufacturing, because what your research and the sort of innovations that you've worked on are very local in many ways. Did that sort of grassroots repair sort of scene from your childhood inform the innovations that you've come to as an adult?
Yeah, look, absolutely, Tegan, because I think, this is where we're all human beings fundamentally, and part of that passion that you bring, in terms of what you love doing, combining your head and your heart, bringing all of that together means that you're actually able to, make a difference at that grassroots level. I mean, to your point, some of the work we're doing now in developing our microfactory technologies, you could sort of say that is a technological solution to doing local and regional recycling, which is really what we're doing. So part of that ability to then say, well, okay, wait a minute, if we were looking at how we might be able to address local environmental challenges around waste recycling, it's got to connect across where people need products, but there is enough of stock and supplies of waste resources. So what I get really excited about is that I'm going to hold these up, doing kind of crazy fun things on the screen, but these are
like terrazzo is very in right now.
I know.
They're like terrazzo tiles.
All of these made from waste glass and waste textiles and all these beautiful colors. And so part of that sort of ability to think, okay, but wait a minute, if we could do local and regional manufacturing, and if we could actually then show that it can be done with, our small business partners who are part of the Smart Centers collaboration, it actually then allows us to continue that innovation journey, and we're doing it together in partnership. I think to me that's the best way to show how we can deliver impact together. So effectively, when we've got, for instance, we're setting up these micro factories in various places, not just in Sydney, but also in regional towns, it's also thinking that bigger picture of those supply chains becoming local and regional. The fact that we might have waste glass and waste textiles going into making these green ceramic tiles, the users in the end markets can also be in that setting. So it's really nice to think that all of us, as we think about end-of-life materials, whether they are broken bits of glass or textile waste, yes, we have to reduce the consumption of materials and products. But logically, when we think about circular economy and circular solutions, the ability to bring these back into production, and to do that with small businesses, local manufacturers, I think is such an exciting way to connect people laterally. So yes, there is a supplier of waste textiles. Now he's connected into this supply chain. And so we're effectively creating that ecosystem where we might be connecting various businesses laterally. And of course, when you can imagine all the different kinds of waste materials that are there in our ecosystem, our green steel technology is sort of that extreme example where, yeah, of course, steel making happens on a much, much larger scale. But the nice thing there is that if we are to replace coal with alternative materials, then we've got to also create that market pull where locally we can bring in things like waste tires as part of making of green steel. So again, it's not about how big or small, an operation is. You can actually connect various participants in that ecosystem. So that's exactly what we've done with what we do with green steel making.
So we're talking about steel manufacturing, we're talking about textiles, and manufacturing is sort of quite an old industry, and you're bringing a really kind of, it's such a buzzword, like disruptive energy to that. What's the sort of response that you get from industry when you're bringing these ideas to the fore? How do you kind of navigate that?
Oh, really, really good question, Tegan. Thank you for asking that, because I think to me that's the absolute icing on the cake. I mean, you sort of, you do all of this science and technology and develop all these ideas in a lab and you prototype and you do all of that. I think the real test almost is that response that you get from your industry partners, where it's that sheer joy and excitement of, first of all, learning about all that new scientific advances that are happening in the labs. So yes, that world of recycling that we get a chance to talk about so many new, scientific discoveries that we're making. And at the same time, when they do get excited, the opportunity to kind of go, hey, you know what, that means we could be trialing and testing this, and we could be doing it right here in Australia. And yes, can we be the first ones to partner up with you on this? And I think to me that's such a nice thing to hear, that people, the love of science, the love of technology, innately in these kinds of industries is always going to be there. It's always going to be part and parcel of the DNA of people who work in these sectors. They get excited about what's the next big thing, what's the next big discovery. But to then take it a step further and go through this collaboration, that we're setting up with UNSW and this whole sort of array of our steel partners, Molycorp, and our green ceramic partners, Chem Dewey. All of these guys, as I said, I mean, big and small, the one thing that they all have in common is that passion to show that manufacturing can be really seen in a completely different light, where it's now an industry that's creating multiple pathways for us to bring in materials and show that waste is really not a waste, it's actually a valuable resource. It's actually a resource that's waiting to be harnessed.
A lot of the people who registered for this event are prospective students or parents of prospective students, and I'd just love to know how much the industry that you're in has changed over your career, manufacturing, engineering, what you've seen from the start versus now, and kind of projecting out what kind of landscape are today's engineering students going to be entering in the next few years.
Yeah, look, I mean, that is so important to keep an eye always on where the future is headed, because I think that's really where, kids who are going through the process of kind of figuring out what career choices they have, the nice thing is, whatever you choose to do, the world is there for you to really contribute and shape. All kinds of new ideas are really always, embraced, which I think is something that's very exciting to see in the world of industrial innovation and transformation, because I think people do want to do the right thing. They want to be able to decarbonize, reduce our carbon footprint. They want to recycle. They want to minimize, the amount of waste that they're sending to landfill. All of the right things, people want to do. So the fact that, students who are coming through studying STEM are going to be entering into a world where all kinds of new ideas will be able to be talked about and discussed, and you'll be able to shape the way we think and we design the future, and a better future, which I think to me is really, really exciting, because I think to me, that understanding that the world is very multifaceted in the way we operate, and it has to be. I mean, we're human beings. We have to care for our planet. We have to care for the health of our people. We have to, of course, manufacture products. We've got to provide those essential services. So no matter where you work, whether it is in engineering, science, health, just making products. I mean, we've got a small company here who we partner up with, collecting waste IT equipment, and that IT equipment could literally come from anywhere. But the fact that, as a business that has been in collecting waste, but now really thinking that, hey, wait a minute, that means these micro factories that we're talking about is within their reach, and keeping in mind that these guys really are not in the world of manufacturing. So we've suddenly gone from a lot of our smaller business partners who are, yes, collecting waste and saw themselves in that domain, are now completely open to the idea that taking that whole new way of doing manufacturing is something that they want to do, which I think is a reflection of where the future is headed. We're not going to have those traditional silos that say, well, I'm in this domain and I don't do this and I don't do that. In fact, quite the opposite. I think people are wanting to explore the possibilities, and really things that were probably considered impossible only a few years ago are now becoming absolutely possible. I mean, we're making plastic filaments. I want to show this plastic filament that we've made.
I love this. It's like a show and tell. Amazing.
Yes. So this is made from, in our microfactories, from 100% waste plastics. And of course, and the fact that we can now take that made from, basically all of that plastic waste that might have ended up in landfill, then we have used that as a feedstock in our own 3D printing. So we talk about manufacturing, making all kinds of products.
So it's not like a thread that you would use. It's not like rope that you would use. It's the ink.
It's exactly, it's like the actual ink. And that's a great way to think about 2D printers, paper. That's that. 3D printers make 3D objects. And of course, to be able to make this filament from waste plastics. So indeed, our microfactories were setting up that take all of that waste plastic. And these are the ones that are really difficult. So when people kind of go, oh, well, too hard. No, we can't do this because this plastic is too hard to recycle. These are the ones that we're basically putting into that whole new realm of possibilities and going, you know what, this is going beyond recycling, and this is about reforming those waste resources that were considered rather difficult to recycle and remanufacture. But then, of course, if somebody's in the world of collecting all of this plastic waste, all of these smaller businesses who are then suddenly going, wait, so I could actually set up a micro factory and I could actually produce these plastic filaments. And we all know how important it is to have that ability to do things locally and regionally, to manufacture, because once you start to make, you can design, you can innovate, you can really supply, and you could be a small business and you could be supplying into all kinds of things locally. So I think it opens up a whole realm of possibilities, which I think is so exciting. I guess, I mean, also just to add to and acknowledge, one of our industry partners, I wanted to, particularly give a shout out, if that's okay, Tegan, to Kandui Technologies, who's, has been such an awesome collaborator, and they're going to be collaborating with us on one of the programs that UNSW is leading, called the Trailblazer program, where it's going to be an opportunity to really pick up on some of these rather challenging, situations that we've talked about when it comes to recycling. And in a regional town like Nara, they're going to be creating all of these brand new jobs, which is exciting.
It's so exciting to see that sort of being implemented there. Veena, we will come back to you in a sec. So we're going to have a chat next with Hannah and come back to Veena and also Anushka, our other panelists, at the end for the Q&A as well. But for now, Hannah Beta, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Just had to get my mic on. Of course, it's 2022, 2023. We've forgotten all these COVID things that we were so used to doing.
And you're literally a computer scientist or have a technology sort of background. So I will just bring people up to date with your bio. You're the technology lead, educator, and you were UNSW Young Woman of the Year in 2020. In your current role as learning designer and research lead at Creatable, Hannah develops education products and technology curriculums which promote entrepreneurship, encourage creative expression through technology, and prepare young people for the future of work. You've also been teaching coding to women and non-binary folk in Code Like a Girl, and you're an industry expert and facilitator for Open Learning's CS 101 courses. Hannah, you're an alumna of the University of New South Wales, graduating with in 2018 with a Bachelor of Engineering. So you came to the public eye a few years ago. But what was motivating that work that you were doing then?
What was motivating for me, the time that I came to the public eye, I guess, was around 2020. I won a fairly prestigious award that still feels very unreal that it happened. New South Wales Women has an award ceremony that happens around this time every year. It's actually tomorrow morning. So if you want to see all these incredible women from around New South Wales, they often broadcast sections of that breakfast that's happening tomorrow. But the award that I won was New South Wales Young Woman of the Year. And it was at quite a pivotal moment in my life that I did receive that award. It was in recognition of a lot of the work that I had done previously in the space of academic tutoring and bringing young women into computer science and technology spaces, which was at the time through UNSW and through Code Like a Girl as well. But within the same month, I also took on a new role where I was stepping more fully into that space. So while it was in recognition of work that I had already done, it was incredibly validating because I was taking the move to actually consolidate that and move into it full time. What I found, so I did a Bachelor of Computer Science at UNSW, and when I graduated, I did the classic thing of taking a job as a software engineer, which is, you can get in and out as quick as 3 years from those degrees and straight into some incredible roles within some, widely recognized companies, both in Australia and beyond. But I'd actually slowed my degree down. I started underloading in order to free myself up to do more academic tutoring at university, as well as doing my honours thesis full time after completing my undergraduate studies. This was all in the name of seeing if research was for me, but also because I really, really loved tutoring and I felt like my time was running out on that. So when I took my first role outside of university, and it was in a software engineering role, I was still very much yearning for that connection with students and with people who were looking to explore technology and computer science. So I never actually gave up my connection to UNSW. I was tutoring after work. After I would finish my full-time job, I would rush to UNSW to teach postgraduate human-computer interaction. And I'd also made a connection with Code Like a Girl through my workplace and became one of their first New South Wales employees. So I guess what happened was I realized that even though my peers and I, it was a common theme to hold this role as an academic tutor, for many it was like a placeholder job, like a well-paying job that you could have on campus while you were studying. But for me, it was more of a passion. And that was reinforced when I was in the workplace. And some people really love, either tech for the sake of tech for the sake of making things, or the role that they're doing is in the context of the product very exciting for them. And I could see that and I was like, oh, but not me though. And, a job can be a job. And there's a new wave of, pressure to love what you do. Which may or may not be valid. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of liking what you do and you just need to do the job that you have. But I felt that I had the opportunity to really step into a space that I liked, when I was surrounded by people who were already doing that, and I could sense that it wasn't for me. So there was a whole lot of, I guess, cognitive dissonance and things for me to get over internally. I was thinking, I'm leaving the industry. I'll never be able to come back. What am I going to do if I don't like it? How could I ever return? But actually, it is quite, it is quite connected and interconnected, especially with young people being in that space. So
yeah. Hannah, how does the work that you did earlier inform the current work that you're doing in learning design?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think it's an unexpected place to have landed in learning design. Facilitating and academic tutoring involves very hands-on learning with students. And what I realized when I was doing mostly facilitation work was that there's a whole ecosystem that exists around learning. And as a person who's involved in a classroom, that's one aspect of it. So the work that I was doing initially when I started in my current role at Creatable was in classroom stuff. It should have been. It was COVID, so it wasn't, but it should have been. I was still working directly with students. And the first thing I had to do because of the pandemic was completely rewrite the curriculum to be compatible with online spaces. So the program I was facilitating fit within the design and technology curriculum. So there was a lot of hands-on stuff like electronics and 3D printing and soldering, and that just wasn't going to fly online. It was impossible. So there was a very interesting challenge there. In the context of learning design, it was like, how do I make emerging technologies that are compatible with online learning interesting to 15-year-old girls? That's quite a complex task. And the work I find myself doing now is similarly complex. The questions we're asking ourselves now is, how do we prepare teachers to help young people prepare for the future of work in an ever-changing industry landscape? Or how do we embed the skills that young people need to succeed in this ever-changing future? Those are questions that are like pressing for society, but they're also questions of learning design. How do we actually create experiences where outcomes will be met and students will be engaged, but also they will retain the knowledge and skills that they learn, and everybody is aligned with the futures that they will inhabit in life after school? So how did my software engineering work inform that? Well, I'm a girl and I had nothing to do with tech before I started uni, and the girls I was standing in front of thought that computer science or technology was like, at worst, like super hard, very uncool, not relevant, couldn't see how it would connect, and at best, ambivalent. So, as somebody who had inhabited that zone myself, that informed the way I approached teaching. It informed the way that I planned the lessons. It informed the projects that we worked on, because I had to find a way to make them connect and engage and see it as contextually relevant. But on top of that, nothing prepares you to feel more like self-conscious and exasperated and frustrated like learning how to code. And it's true. Like the whole idea is that unless it's perfect, it's wrong, and it's not you. We're gonna get there. Like it's a whole exercise in perseverance. And so remembering those feelings, and being able to really inhabit the mental space that these people are in when they're learning, helps to inform the way that you teach them and the way you connect with them. Some of the things I saw, with other teachers who were maybe less empathetic or could connect less with their own learning experience, or maybe didn't have the same issues and challenges, you would explain something and then the students go, yeah, I don't get that. And then they just say the same thing again. And you're like, yeah, I still don't get that. Like it's not landing. So that was fully born of my experiences as an engineer, having to explain complex things to people who don't understand. And as a learner myself, having to learn new things and grapple with the emotional journey that comes with learning.
I really love the idea of empathy as being a really important part of being successful in STEM, because it's not a characteristic that you immediately connect when you think about it in the traditional sense. And of course, your work that you've done isn't just in Australia. You've actually recently partnered through UNICEF with learners in Burundi in Africa.
Yes, that's right. Creatable was running this creative technology program in Sydney with high school girls to get them into STEM. And UNICEF Australia had heard about this program and approached us asking if we might be able to do something similar for students in Burundi. By something similar, I don't mean like a hands-on creative tech syllabus, but something similar in the context of giving young people the skills they need to inhabit these futures that are ahead of them. Burundi was a very interesting example because as a result of the civil wars they've experienced, their population is incredibly young and they've lost a lot of those industries and the knowledge that was held by the people who are no longer with us. And so what that means is that with 98% of their population being subsistence farmers and the agriculture being the main contributor to the GDP of the country, is that there was very little in terms of hope and prospects for young people. They would sit and wait to be approached for jobs, and that was how they perceived themselves to be able to get jobs. And so while it, you know, in Sydney locally, you might say, yeah, there's an underrepresentation of women in STEM. How do we tackle that issue? But if we zoom out a little bit, there's like young people don't have the skills they need to, you know, create jobs or inhabit the future. So this is a symptom of a specific iteration of a broader problem. And so what we did was created an engineering and entrepreneurship curriculum for these young students, years 8 and 9, that revolved around technology projects that they could implement in their own context. One of which was a solar distillation device called a solar still. It's basically a box that you can put water into and it will cleanse the water through essentially the greenhouse gas effect. It will remove particulates and kill pathogenic bacteria, and you can make it out of wood and plastic. The other one was a rocket stove, which is an efficient wood burning stove that can be made out of any insulating material. And what we saw on the ground was that they mostly made them out of clay. Now, this doesn't sound like tech necessarily, except that it is literally based on year 7, year 8, year 9 science concepts of conductors and insulators, incomplete and complete combustion, the greenhouse gas effect, condensation, evaporation, all those kinds of things that you learn but are not connected to your daily life. So it was an amazing experience. I mean, I was hoping to have gone to Burundi, but what landed up happening was because we were in the pandemic, we were able to create a textbook and create video resources that then people on the ground from UNICEF Burundi, the teachers came from all the provinces to the university for a week and we trained the teachers. And then the teachers went back to their schools and implemented the program. And now it's being embedded into the national curriculum. So the joke at the time was that there are more Creatable employees in the Ministry of Education in Burundi than there are in Creatable in Australia. But the project was an incredible example of how putting the right tools in place can be, you know, that's really empathetic, right? You can go and give somebody an electronic device, but if they don't have electricity in their home, then what have you really done? Nothing. But if you can connect young people with the information, the knowledge, and the skills they need, then the outcomes that we saw were so far outsized beyond what we had expected. Young girls were saying they were able to go to school earlier than they used to because they didn't have to watch the food cooking. They didn't have to collect firewood after dark. So there was less. There was one student, this is quite heavy, but she was saying essentially her family doesn't have to worry about her getting sexually assaulted or raped after going out to collect firewood in the nighttime because they would have to collect it every single night. Now she only has to collect once every 2 weeks. And so the safety, the access to knowledge and education that comes from these very simple solutions is, beyond what we could have hoped for.
I mean, if that isn't technology making a difference in the lives of women, I don't know what is, right?
Right. And if you said to me, you know, how can we help young women in Burundi go to school more? I wouldn't have said make a stove. Do you know what I mean? So these education programs can have outcomes that are beyond the scope of what is planned, but essentially those are some very, you know, female specific outcomes that we saw. But as well as that, the young people at the schools were collaborating and joined to make like a revenue generating group where they would go and build these rocket stoves for people in the community and pool the money and buy resources for the school. And they would run a competition to have similar kind of innovative projects that they would implement, and then implement these as actual businesses that they can use to help their families make money. So there were economic, like the initial kind of plan was for it to create jobs and to create economic outcomes for these young people. But there was these side effects of safety, of access to education, of kind of entrepreneurial mindsets. And yeah, it was fantastic.
What an incredible impact, Hannah. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you in a second, but it's time for me to have a chat with our third panelist, Professor Anushka Patel. Welcome, Anushka. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Tegan.
Now I need to embarrass you by reading out your bio so that everyone at home understands just how impressive you are. Scientia Professor Anushka Patel is the Chief Executive Officer of the George Institute for Global Health and a Scientia Professor at the University of New South Wales. She's a cardiologist with research interests in the prevention and management of common chronic conditions through large-scale clinical trials and implementation science. She undertook her medical training at the University of Queensland, that's my alma mater as well, with subsequent postgrad degrees from Harvard, never heard of it, and the University of Sydney. She's also a fellow of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians and the Australian Academy of Health and Medical Sciences. Anushka, you have just like the most mind-blowing list of qualifications and accomplishments, but you told me the other day that you still suffer from imposter syndrome. What is up with that?
Well, it's sitting with a group of women on a panel like today. I mean, what an amazing panel that I've been asked to join. Look, throughout my career, at times I've been asked to participate in groups, in meetings such as this, to join particular influential organizations, and it definitely crosses your mind, why have I been asked? And I think it probably crosses most people's minds. And perhaps I did used to worry a little bit about that, but I think I pretty quickly came to a conclusion, well, that's unknowable. Am I ticking two boxes? I'm brown and I'm a woman, or am I here because I have something to bring to the table? And I decided, well, that's unknowable. I have enough faith that I am bringing a relevant set of experiences and skills and background, a diversity of voice to the discussion, the conversation, the task at hand. And rather than wasting my energy on that, it's really focusing on what can I contribute, and being at that table, being in that group, being in the discussion, importantly contributing that voice. Otherwise, you might as well not be there. So I think it's something that many women, probably many people, go through. But for me, it's become a non-issue as my career has progressed.
The National Health Medical Research Council, NHMRC, has brought in new quotas. I guess there's new rules around gender equity. You're part of the research committee. Do you see those as being tokenistic, or do you think that they're a positive step for women in STEM?
No, and look, I'm speaking as an individual, not as a member of the research committee of NHMRC, but I think the NHMRC has made an incredibly bold and incredibly, I think, welcome move. I think it's actually potentially a world first. So what they've done, for those who are less familiar, is taken a real step towards ensuring that women at the more senior end in medical research are awarded a similar number of grants as men. And what we've seen over a couple of decades, not much more than that, in fact, but despite a couple of decades of trying to increase opportunities in the pipeline of women, early and mid-career researchers progressing through their career, where there's been some success, we still see this major scissor graph that people often describe, where you kind of still at the senior levels, you see great disparity between men and women in terms of applying for grants, but also to some extent success rates. So what the NHMRC has decided for a particular scheme is that they will be giving the same number of grants to men and women. And just to dispel any any myths that means the quality of research that will be funded will be inferior in any way. They're of course funding people right, at the margins of having been funded within any other cutoff or any other scheme. And fundamentally, I think the premise for this type of action is very sound and can't be debated, which is essentially men and women have equal capabilities. And if they're given equal opportunities and you're still seeing disparities, there is a structural, there is a societal, there is a cultural, there may be an institutional, there may be unconscious bias, there may be conscious bias. There are various reasons that are preventing us from achieving that equality. So this is, I think, a very positive move to try and address it. It'll be monitored. I'm sure the NHMRC will assess outcomes, but I think it's a very positive move.
How do you see the difference between, we heard from Veena and Hannah before, they're sort of both in the kind of engineering side of STEM, the science and engineering, and you're from the medical side. Do you think it's easier, harder, the same for women sort of seeking a top-level career through medicine?
Well, it's challenging for me to make comparisons, but what I can say from a medicine perspective, I think it's very diverse. It's difficult to make a single conclusion, but if we look around medical schools, not just in Australia, but around the world, we are seeing equal numbers of men and women who are entering medical school. But then the career progression does vary and does vary quite substantially, not only in terms of career progression through whatever ranks you might define. Of course, there are multiple careers in medicine. You can become a clinician and remain a clinician for the rest of your life. You can do what I did, is combine being a clinician as a researcher until you stop seeing patients, which I did as of the end of last year. Or you can become a scientist, or you can go into industry, or you can, there's many, many careers. So there's definitely differences in men and women in types of career progression. So, for example, in cardiology, which is what I pursued, still in Australia, only 15% of cardiologists are women. And some subspecialties, it's even a lower proportion. So, for example, interventional cardiology or electrophysiology, it's less than 5%. So there are some clear differences. And I think there are specific barriers to certain professions within medicine that persist. And I think there's still opportunities to address those inequities.
When we're talking about inequities, one of the things I know that's really important to you around sort of feminism is being intersectional, appreciating that gender is only one part of who we are. There's lots of different facets of our lives that can influence us, and there's different ways that people have advantage or disadvantage. How have you sort of seen that play out in your career and the people around you?
So, I mean, I guess, Tegan, just even listening to Veena and Hannah, I mean, what do we have in common and what do we have that's different? So, I mean, obviously we're all women. Hannah's had a experience in Burundi. I'm from Uganda. I'm a third generation Ugandan who migrated to Australia. So there's some commonality there. Veena and I share Indian heritage, but apart from that, I don't know anything about much more about Hannah and Veena. We all have very different, probably, backgrounds. My own career, I guess I've been fortunate in that I've come from a family where I have a brother. My parents' sort of expectations of me and my brother were no different. Their hopes for us were no different. Opportunities provided were no different. We even though we left Uganda with one suitcase between the four of us, both my parents were able to get jobs easily, and socioeconomically we were always quite privileged. I don't know if any of you, Tegan, or anyone else has done one of those privilege walks where usually the first question, you're asked a question, you stand in a line and you're asked a question and you take a step forwards or backwards depending on your answer, and its aim is to pull out perspectives of power and privilege. And usually the first question is, are you a white man? But there are a bunch of other questions. And there are some problems with the privilege walk that many have pointed out, and some concerns about how it's utilized and how it's interpreted. But I recently participated in a privilege walk that was organized by some mid-career women at the George Institute from across our country offices. And this was slightly different because we weren't asked to do the walk based on our own personal characteristics, but we were all given a persona. So we were given a slip of paper with a description of who we were, and it was, 4 or 5 lines describing characteristics. And then we were asked the usual questions, and we stepped forward and we stepped backwards, and we were asked, why did you step forward? And what was very clear from that exercise is that we make assumptions about each other based on very simple things: your gender, what degree you've done, where you live, and those assumptions could be completely wrong. And so I think in my career, and particularly in the work that I do, working in global health and fundamentally focused on addressing inequities in health and health outcomes, really understanding the potential consequences of making assumptions that may be inaccurate is really, really important. I think that's also important for thinking about career progression.
Less about your career and more about the sort of research that you do as someone who's looking at chronic conditions over long periods of time. What kind of work is or should be being done to address inequalities in women's health and what we know about how chronic illness affects women?
Well, I think the first thing, Tegan, is what does everyone think about when you say women's health? And I will guess that
we think about uteruses.
Yeah, it's bikini medicine. So it's sexual.
I haven't heard it called that before. That's amazing.
Right. So that's but yet we know that the leading cause of premature death and disability in women is non-communicable diseases. It's cardiovascular disease, it's stroke, it's cancer. And so taking a life course approach to women's health is important. And it's not important just because these conditions are also leading causes of premature death and disability in men. Why it's important is recognition. So, as a cardiologist, it was a common reaction when I had a patient who was a woman who had a heart attack. She was saying she would be shocked. I didn't know that women had heart attacks. So there's a lack of understanding. There is also biological differences in risk factors and their associations with many common chronic conditions. So there's a scientific aspect of trying to understand what the differences are. And then there's some real evidence to different degrees that gender plays an important role, not just sex. So how healthcare is delivered. We talk about, for example, again, I'll give an example as a cardiologist, the symptoms of a heart attack. We describe them as typical or atypical, and we say that men get typical symptoms and women get atypical symptoms. So the connotation there is the standard is what men get and women get something different. So these are all very important areas for research. These are very important areas for actual application into our sort of clinical work on a daily life. But it also has implications for how we organize health services, systems, and respond to the upstream determinants of health, which can also be different for men and women.
I'm going to bring us all together again. Thank you so much, Anushka. It's so enlightening to hear those words. Bring us all together again, because we did get lots and lots of questions from you, our audience, before the session started, and I want to see if we can get through as many as possible. And so I might start with this question. I can't give it a name. It's just a question that's come through, and I think I might put it to Hannah, although I'm sure you to drive change towards gender equality in STEM.
Sorry, Tegan, do you mind just repeating the question?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question, so it's worth saying twice. What are some of the key skills that we as women can offer to drive change towards gender equality in STEM?
Well, I think that I'm going to take an unpopular route here and focus on what some might call soft skills. Because the reason I say that is because there's this idea that soft skills are inherent and hard skills are learned. But what I'm working on at the moment within my remit at Creatable and this research that I'm undertaking in teacher professional development is how do we actually pull out, identify, codify, and teach these skills that have been so, palmed off as things that women just have and men just don't. And that includes things like empathy, compassion, perseverance, imagination. How do we actually teach these things to young people is where I'm kind of sitting at the moment. So when I say these are not necessarily learnable, the thing is that they are learnable. And when you go back to even like Greek philosophy, there's all this kind of conversation about whether things are virtues or attributes, you know, is it inherent or is it learned? And there's a lot of evidence that says they are learnable. They are, and thus if they're learnable, then they are teachable. And the reason I want to focus on these skills specifically that women can bring is because two things. One, we already teach a lot of the hard skills really, really, really well. So I'm happy to put that aside and say we've got that done. And then these are things that are usually wielded against women, you know, as things that are, you know, not necessarily positive in a business context, not necessarily having great impact on commercial outcomes, not welcome in certain industry and environments. So what we've seen in the research, especially in industry and the future of work, is that these things actually make a massive difference. And I think that women have unique experience that makes them uniquely positioned to comment on these kinds of skills. So that is my perspective.
Is it not also selling men short to sort of say that they don't have them or to
Absolutely.
undervalue them?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to subvert this idea that the way that men do things is not only normal, but correct and the way things should be moving forward. It's more that we should be questioning this status quo, and not that women are the only ones with these skills, but that men should feel confident to bring those kinds of things into the workplace themselves. And the reason they might not, if I'm moving away from the structural reasons, is because culturally and socially it is not acceptable for them to demonstrate those skills as well. So yeah, it's not on women to be the only ones to do it. It's that we should celebrate these things as pertinent and meaningful from everybody.
Yeah, if we can achieve balance there, then it actually helps all genders. Veena, a question that I might put to you. What were the barriers that you faced in becoming a successful woman in STEM, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, look, I mean, certainly, you know, if you think about the kind of the bigger picture I've talked about in the work that I do in a far more sort of holistic manner, for me, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is how do we actually translate our work and how do we then show impact in a real world setting? And I think to me, you know, what I really love about, you know, what we do at Smart Center at UNSW is that opportunity to be able to do both. That yes, you can do that fundamental science, and yes, you can actually then apply a lot of that science, deliver, translate, and deliver on impact. So I think part of that sort of early part of thinking always will be, well, you know, if you're working within that ecosystem, is to be able to then define those kind of, you know, partnerships in a broader context. And of course, partnerships can be your academic partners and your research collaborators. But if you actually then start to say, well, I'm going to actually also start to broaden that scope of partnership, as in bringing in users of research to be part of that, I think that is where, of course, as we are working, you know, off that platform, that we need to be able to see how we apply our research, is to then say, okay, well, you know, how do I define and work and choose who those users of my research will be? And so I think to me, you know, it's an important question, and it'll always be one that challenges all of us, because on one hand, you do want to work with those partners who respect and who love that, you know, piece of fundamental science and understand that, you know, sometimes these discoveries take time and they're hard and they're not easy. But you also want that sort of partnership to then reflect the fact that, yes, there is some degree of patience, but yet at the same time, there's an opportunity to do that translation and collaboration together. So I think in a way, the complexity of the challenge that lies ahead is to be able to define in your own way, what would you then call success for you and the team and your surrounding collaborators and partners, and to basically talk about it in an open and transparent manner, that yes, it will be a journey. And on that journey of partnership and collaboration, working, and doing all of this STEM work, at UNSW with all of our partners, actually has got a really great chance of success. So you can do both, that fundamental as well as the application and impactful work. So I would probably say looking at and defining success and defining your partnerships and the ecosystem and who you want to work with. So I think we've had tremendous opportunities to do that. And I think, we talk about all those government programs that effectively enable both to happen. So whether it is ARC, industrial research transformation hubs, all of that work, or now particularly more recently with those Trailblazer programs, there are a lot of opportunities where UNSW has played a leading role. So I think it's an exciting future.
Thanks. Yeah, defining success is a really important one. And one that I'll put to you, Anushka, do you have any advice for future female students in the medical field?
So I think the first thing I would say is that if you become a medical student, male or female, the career pathways in medicine now are incredibly diverse. So most people study medicine because they want to be doctors and they want to see patients and they want to cure illness and prevent disease. But there are so many diverse pathways. And I think the other thing I would say is that while there's still a lot of work to be done, and I think the example that we spoke about earlier around the initiative the NHMRC is doing around trying to improve gender equity, there's still work to be done. If I reflect back on the last 35 years that I've been in medicine, there has been a lot of change. It's been unequal between different branches of medicine. But there has been a lot of change. There's been recognition, sometimes legislated, but beyond that, greater recognition that women often more than men have to balance lots of responsibilities, and these are these are careers that are all consuming. And if you want to succeed, there needs to be mechanisms in place, structural mechanisms to allow women to pursue the careers that they want. More to be done, but lots more opportunities, certainly lots in the last decade, lots of change. So I would encourage women to continue to pursue careers in medicine, and the world's your oyster.
That actually sort of segues into another question here that I'm really interested to hear Hannah's views on, especially given your recent work overseas, Hannah, about the attrition rate of women in STEM. So lots of people start, they're really excited, and then that scissor graph that we heard Anushka mention before. How can the STEM community bring awareness to negative experiences of women in STEM, or the different factors that might be at play, and make that experience better?
I think that's a great question, because it's hard, especially on days like this, to be positive, or it's hard not to focus on the negatives, or what's lacking, what's not there yet, what's worse than we thought it was, what hasn't changed since last year. And so sometimes negative experiences, sharing them, especially with other women, can be a motivating force and a connective force. But other times they can be detrimental and not helpful. So finding ways to use these stories to make people aware of the realities is not necessarily the best way to encourage young people to enter these careers, because what we're hoping for and what we're planning for and what we're working towards is that these scenarios will hopefully not continue to play out. So it's very important to be careful about when and how we share these things, and how they're framed when they do, because what I struggled with, and I sat with this cognitive dissonance for a long time while teaching young girls, is if the industry is as bad as we say that it is, and as bad as we have experienced it to be, then what am I doing telling these young people to go and do it? So I think it's an important thing to connect with other people, to validate your own perspective, and to understand that it's not personal, that it is systemic, and that it's actually got nothing to do with you personally. But we do need to make sure that these realities are known in a way that is not going to, I guess, inhibit the impact of the kind of development work that we're doing and creating more equality at the beginning of that pipeline.
So not sugarcoating it, but not only focusing on the negatives either. Thank you so much to all three of you for being part of this event. Scientia Professor Veena Sahajwalla, Hannah Beda, and Professor Anushka Patel. And thank you so much to everyone who joined in this live discussion. I hope it's been interesting. I hope it's been entertaining. I hope you go away feeling inspired. And a reminder that the link to this recording will be emailed to you all so you can watch it back again and again, as I'm sure you will. We hope you've enjoyed the talk. Thanks again for joining us, and goodbye.